They said I ruined the view. That's how it started. Just one line in a letter from the HOA, printed on fancy paper like it was the Constitution or something. Visual disruption to community harmony. What they really meant was they didn't like looking at the gray wall rising behind my yard. But I didn't build it for them. I built it for my daughter, for my dog, and for the piece of ground I called home. Because I'd seen that creek behind my fence climb a little higher every year. Like it was creeping closer just to see how much it could take before somebody noticed. The folks on the board didn't see the rain forecasts the way I did. They didn't hear the late-night gurgle of water clawing at the fence posts, or the sound of mud sliding under the deck when the yard turned into soup. I saw it, I felt it, and I knew. If I waited for the HOA to fix anything, I might as well buy a boat. So one weekend I started stacking concrete blocks. Not pretty ones either. Just solid, hand-poured slabs I reinforced with rebar. I curved the line of it along the back fence where the land dipped, gave it a slope for runoff, laid French drains behind it. It wasn't art, but it was functional. And by the time I finished, my arms were cut up, my back screamed, and my knees sounded like popcorn. But standing there, hands on my hips, covered in dust, I felt proud. It wasn't just a wall. It was common sense, poured one bucket at a time. Of course, Carter saw it first. He's the HOA president. The kind of guy who wears white loafers on gravel and somehow keeps them clean. He walks his golden doodle every evening like it's a royal procession. That Tuesday, he stopped at my fence, looked through the slats, and said, "You putting in a bunker, Nate?" He smirked like he'd just invented humor. I wiped the sweat off my brow and said, "Just keeping the creek out of my yard." He chuckled. "Bit overkill, don't you think? FEMA's not exactly issuing tsunami warnings here." I didn't answer, just watched him tug his dog away. Some people think a laugh is harmless, but when it's dripping with condescension, it sticks like sap. By Friday, my wall was the talk of the neighborhood. The board secretary, Melissa, posted a photo on the Nextdoor app, snapped from her upstairs window no less, with the caption, "Unapproved structure, ugly and unsafe. Discuss." Discuss they did. By Monday morning, I had 3 anonymous notes on my porch and a thick envelope in the mailbox. Notice of violation. They said my wall wasn't approved, that it violated Article 4, Section 12 of the Covenant. 14 days to remove it or face $200 daily fines. I sat there on my porch reading it, the ink still warm from the printer, the smell of wet cement in the air. I'd spent 3 weekends building that thing, and they wanted it gone because it didn't match their aesthetic. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I pulled out my old Army folder. Inside were service records, engineering specs, FEMA flood risk maps. I highlighted the parts about property protection measures. Then I typed a letter back. Calm, factual, nothing emotional. I explained it wasn't a structure. It was a water redirection barrier built within FEMA guidelines. I attached photos of past floods, the creek inches from my fence line, and reminded them that the HOA hadn't maintained the common drainage channels for years. Certified mail, return receipt. 2 days later, Carter showed up with a Starbucks cup and that politician's smile. "Nate, I got your letter," he said. "Listen, this isn't about safety, it's about harmony. We can't have everyone building fortresses, right?" I looked at him. "You think it's a fortress?" "Well," he shrugged, "it sends a message." "Yeah," I said, "that I'm tired of waiting for the board to fix the drainage you've ignored." He smiled tighter. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said, "I'm making it safe." He didn't finish his coffee. After that, neighbors stopped waving. Melissa avoided eye contact. A couple even crossed the street when I was out front. Only my next-door neighbor, Tom, retired electrician, tough as old wire, still said hi. One afternoon, he wheeled over a couple of extra bags of quick-set mix and said, "They'll hate you for this, but you're doing it right." We finished the far corner together, not talking much, just working like men who'd seen enough nonsense to know better. When I sealed the final layer, the forecast said heavy rain was coming, a slow-moving atmospheric river, whatever that meant. I stood in the yard that night, rain tapping my hood, flashlight beam dancing across the new concrete, and felt ready for once. The wall held through that storm, every drop deflected, every drain working. But a week later, the HOA sent another letter, hand-delivered this time. Notice of continued violation. They claimed my wall, posed potential liability, and created disharmony with surrounding properties. They even cited a brand new clause supposedly passed at their last meeting. I hadn't seen any notice about that vote. They just changed the rules mid-game. That's when I stopped thinking of it as a disagreement and started treating it like a mission. I pulled the city ordinances, FEMA bulletins, the whole 9 yards. I documented everything. The paved-over culverts, the blocked drains, the way they replaced functional gravel channels with fancy brick walkways that trapped water. See, a few months before my project, the HOA had launched their big beautification initiative. Carter stood up at a meeting with a slideshow, talking about reclaiming the elegance of our community paths. They voted to cover the old drainage lines with decorative brick. I asked if they'd consulted an engineer. Melissa rolled her eyes and said, "It's a landscape upgrade, Nate, not a dam project." Yeah, well, turned out it was both. After they paved it, I started noticing puddles that never used to form. The creek ran faster, the soil stayed soggy for days. I even set up little gauge stakes behind my fence. Nothing fancy, just markers. Every rain, the water line climbed higher. I showed Carter the photos. He laughed and said, "You really need a hobby." I told him, "This is my hobby, keeping people dry." He didn't like that answer. 2 weeks later, after another minor storm left water creeping under my fence, I filed a report with the city and copied the HOA. No one replied. But a landscaping crew did show up to install solar lights along that same brick path, because nothing says safety like mood lighting over a drainage failure. Tom came over that evening, shaking his head. "They're putting lipstick on a corpse," he said. "No," I told him, "they're putting targets on our backs." He frowned. "You think it'll get that bad?" I looked at the sky. "It's not if, Tom, it's when." So I started mapping everything, every elevation dip, every slope change. I used old county topography data and overlaid it on Google Earth. The picture was clear. They hadn't just ignored the drainage. They'd reversed it. What once carried water away from the homes now funneled it straight toward us. I sent one last letter, printed 60 copies, slid one into every mailbox on the block. Some thanked me. Most ignored it. Mark, one of the board members, tore his copy in half and tossed it on my lawn. The next morning I picked up the wet pieces and thought, fine. I tried. 3 days later, the air changed. You could feel it in your bones, thick, heavy, like the world was holding its breath. The National Weather Service called it a Category 4 atmospheric river. 8 to 14 inches of rain, expected 40-mile-an-hour gusts. Every surrounding county issued flash flood warnings, except ours, because our HOA never bothered to request updated hydrology assessments. According to them, we were minimal risk. I printed new flyers myself, color-coded maps, emergency checklists, evacuation tips. At the bottom in bold, I wrote, "If you wait for the HOA to act, you'll already be underwater." Tom and I spent the afternoon walking door to door. Some neighbors took sandbags from his wagon. Others called us alarmists. Mark confronted me on his porch. "You're fear-mongering," he snapped. "I'm giving people time," I said. "There's no official emergency," he barked back. "Yet," I replied. "But the water's not waiting for paperwork." That night, Melissa posted an update on the HOA site. Despite rumors being spread by certain individuals, there is no cause for alarm. Yeah, well, nature doesn't read community bulletins. By morning, the sky was the color of bruised fruit. It didn't thunder, it just fell. A thick curtain of rain that never lifted. Within hours, water was flowing across the new brick path like a stream. By noon, I was knee-deep in runoff filming everything, proof of what I'd been saying all along. I uploaded the footage, sent it to every neighbor with the subject line, "Live evidence of HOA negligence." 2 hours later, Carter blasted an email. "Please refrain from unauthorized media dissemination." By 4 p.m., the first house flooded, Gina and Rob's, 2 blocks east, right where the walkway sloped down. By 6, the South Bend was a lake. My phone buzzed nonstop, photos, calls, messages, from the same people who'd laughed at me a week earlier. And me? I was standing behind my wall, watching the creek roar like an angry god, and my yard stayed dry. The wall held, Every drop diverted into the trench I'd carved toward an old storm drain that ran behind Tom's property. Around 7, my phone rang again. Melissa this time. Her voice was shaking. "Nate, we need help. The clubhouse is taking on water. The lower lots are flooding. Carter's SUV got stuck trying to leave." I let her talk. When she finally said, "We didn't think it'd be this bad," I just answered, "I know you didn't." There was silence. Then quietly, "What should we do?" I took a long breath. "Start by admitting this isn't about aesthetics anymore. It's survival." When I hung up, I felt something shift. Not in the ground, but in me. For months, they'd called me paranoid, stubborn, difficult. Now they were calling me for help. By midnight, the rain had been falling 30 hours straight. The streetlights flickered. The creek was a raging brown serpent slamming against the wall, trying to find a way in. I walked it with a flashlight, checking every seam. No cracks, no leaks. The concrete flexed, the rebar held. It wasn't beautiful, but it was strong. And right then, that was enough. Then, somewhere beyond the storm's roar, I heard it. The sharp, heavy crack of failure. Not from my wall, but from down near the brick path. I swung the beam of my flashlight and saw it. The walkway collapsing like a spine snapping underwater. Each brick section giving way to the pressure they'd pretended didn't exist. The decorative planters ripped free, lights shorted out, and a wall of water shot through the neighborhood like vengeance. Tom ran out from his porch, yelling over the wind, "It's giving way. Nate, the whole damn thing." We stood there, soaked, watching the path of reflection turn into the path of destruction. Downhill headlights blinked underwater. Someone's car, maybe Carter's, was half submerged. I sprinted back inside, hit the emergency horn I kept from my service days. The sound cut through the rain like a war cry. Kids started crying, dogs barking, people shouting in the dark. I called 911. They said they were overwhelmed. "If you're in a secure location, shelter in place." I turned to Tom. "We're the secure location." He nodded and started filling more sandbags. Neighbors began arriving one by one, soaked, shivering, dragging kids and pets and trash bags full of whatever they could grab. Melissa came last. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, her phone clutched like a lifeline. "It's all gone," she whispered. "The clubhouse, the path, Carter's house, everything." I stepped aside. "Get in." Inside, the house hummed with generator power, the smell of soup filling the air. I handed her a towel and said, "Sit down. Tell me what happened." She did, between sobs. 6 homes underwater, pump failure, no city help coming. By dawn, there were 27 people inside my house. Tom kept the generator running. I opened the upstairs rooms for families with kids. The living room floor was a patchwork of sleeping bags and quiet prayers. No one mentioned the wall, but every glance toward the back window said it all. Around 3 a.m., I went back outside one last time. The rain hadn't stopped, but the creek had peaked, just 4 inches below the top of the barrier. It trembled, but it held. When I came back in, Melissa was sitting by the fire staring at the flames. She looked up and whispered, "You were right." I didn't say anything. I just poured her another cup of coffee and sat beside her, listening to the rain hammer the roof like applause that came too late. When morning finally came, the storm slowed from a scream to a whisper. The light outside was gray, heavy, like the world was tired of itself. I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee and looked toward the creek. The water line had dropped maybe 6 inches. The wall, scarred, muddy, nicked by debris, still stood firm. Behind it, my lawn was damp but solid. Beyond it, the neighborhood looked like a battlefield. You could see where the water had carved its path, the decorative walkway gone, planters smashed, fences half buried in silt. The smell of wet earth mixed with gasoline and that sour rot that comes when wood's been drowned too long. People were stumbling out of their homes with dazed eyes and trash bags, carrying whatever pieces of their lives the water hadn't taken. Tom came up beside me, handed me a thermos and said, "Looks like the wall did its job." "Yeah," I said quietly. But theirs didn't. By mid-morning there was a knock on my door. Not a text, not an email, an actual knock, soft but steady. I opened it and there stood Carter. The man who'd once told me my wall ruined the view now looked like he'd been dragged through a swamp. His khaki pants were soaked to the thighs, his HOA logo polo stained with mud. He was holding a plastic bin full of papers and a laptop that was still dripping. He didn't even try to fake that smile this time. He just stood there and said I was wrong. I waited. I didn't think it would get this bad, he said. 17 houses flooded. The clubhouse is ruined. The electrical system's shot. People are scared, Nate. They're blaming us. They're talking about lawsuits. I nodded, slow. You should probably let them. He looked up, eyes red. I don't know what to do. I studied him for a long second. The arrogance was gone. What was left was just a man, scared, wet, defeated. Start by helping, I said. You want redemption? Grab a shovel. And he did. All day long we worked. Carter carried buckets. Tom coordinated cleanup. Melissa took notes and checked in on families staying upstairs. Even Mark, the board member who'd torn up my warnings, showed up holding a soaked photo frame. He didn't say a word, just nodded and joined the line. We emptied crawl spaces, dug trenches, moved debris. It wasn't organized, at least not at first, but it was real. People who'd never so much as said good morning to each other were now passing sandbags hand to hand in the mud. Around sunset, the rain finally stopped. The air was heavy and still, broken only by the hum of generators. We stood there at the wall, the sun bleeding orange through the mist. Kids splashed in puddles. Someone's dog barked at a floating branch. For the first time since all this began, there was silence. Not awkward, not tense, just peaceful. Melissa walked up beside me, her voice quiet. When this is over, she said, we need to dissolve the HOA, start fresh. A neighborhood co-op maybe, with engineers involved, actual maintenance plans. I looked at her, surprised by how genuine she sounded. You think they'll go for that? They'll follow whoever kept them dry, she said. And that's you. I didn't answer. I just looked at the wall. That night we made dinner, rice, canned beans, instant soup, whatever people brought. Families camped out in my living room, some talking softly, others just sitting in silence. The generator buzzed steady. Tom and I took turns watching the creek through the window. Every once in a while someone would whisper, I wish I'd built a wall too. I didn't say anything. The next morning sunlight poured through the kitchen window like a truce. The storm was gone, but the damage was clear. I gathered whoever was awake and said, we're not waiting for the city. We start fixing things now. We divided tasks. Tom handled power and first aid. Melissa organized supplies. Carter, of all people, offered to pay for whatever we needed until insurance kicked in. Out of pocket, he said. No more votes, no more waiting. I turned my garage whiteboard into a map of the neighborhood, marking which homes were flooded, which were salvageable, which needed evacuation. We set up a command post right there in my driveway. By noon, it looked like a small relief camp. Tables, extension cords, thermoses of coffee, even a first aid station. When the city finally sent someone, a civil engineer named Monica, she expected chaos. Instead, she found a group of tired but coordinated people already halfway through a recovery plan. I showed her the elevation maps, the videos, the data we'd collected. You've done more in 48 hours than most municipalities, she said. I handed her a flash drive. Everything the HOA ignored. Every failure, every fix. She stared at me like she wasn't sure whether to thank me or deputize me. You ever considered joining a resilience task force? She asked. I smiled. No, but I'll teach one. And that's what I did. And she's right. Because beauty isn't always what you see. Sometimes it's what keeps you standing when everything else is washing away. So yeah, they said I ruined the view. But the view's still here. The water's gone. The people stayed. And the wall never moved an inch. If you've ever had to stand your ground against people who just didn't understand why you did what you did, drop a comment below. Tell me, was I right to build it? Or was the HOA just trying to protect the neighborhood's look? Do you think I went too far? Or not far enough? Either way, remember this. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster isn't luck or approval. It's the wall you were brave enough to build when everyone else was laughing.